Luba, welcome to B2B Content Strategist podcast. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you, Amy. I'm thrilled to be talking to you today.
Well, it's an honor to have you on, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So to get started, it would be absolutely fantastic if you could just share a bit really about your career and also about your most recent role as well. So Director of Content at Picton Mahoney Asset Management. I'd just love to know, how you got to where you are today.
I describe myself on LinkedIn as an accidental marketer because really I did come into marketing completely by accident, but it was a very happy accident. I started out working in the world of magazines and I really wanted to be in print journalism. I just loved print. It's funny that we're talking about digital marketing now, but I loved print. I loved the written word. I studied English literature at university. And so that was my goal from the day that I walked out of the university. And I ended up working at a magazine for 5 years. And then after a while, I just got tired of the deadlines, like the grind of the deadlines. But I learned so much from it. So I'm forever grateful for it. And then in 2004, I just randomly saw a job posting for Deloitte in Canada, and they were hiring a managing editor. And I thought, well, this is fantastic. I am a managing editor right now, but I'm an editor of a magazine. So I just switched from print to digital. So that shouldn't be too hard. And then I still get to do the things that I love to do, but just in a different setting. So that small decision changed everything for me career-wise, because I went from being somebody who's crafting words and stories for an audience of business readers to somebody who's I was doing the same thing for business readers, but they were more business decision makers, and it was content marketing, although we didn't call it content marketing at the time. Like, I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was 2004 that I made that pivotal move. So, content strategy was not a thing, although that's exactly what we were doing when we were taking content, shaping it, putting it on the website, communicating it out. So I actually spent 11 years at Deloitte. And then from there on, I went to a couple of different places. I did a short kind of a detour working in the energy sector for a utility company, which was quite interesting. But most of my time I spent in professional and financial services. So the other financial services I've worked for, RBC Wealth, and RBC is a global company, the largest of the big banks in Canada. And I was with their wealth management division. That was a global role as director of content. And then I was also at Aviso Wealth, which is a smaller wealth management company in Canada, which serves a credit union. So it's kind of like it provides all the back-end services, wealth management services, funds, also like self-directed investing platform. And I was doing PR and social media there. So that was a little bit of a divergence, or a kind of a stretch of things that I love to do anyways. And then at Picton Mahoney, as director of content, I was responsible for all content external on the website, generated content, social content. I provided an assist for the webcasts and such, but generally all content came to me for review and final approval. So that's really what I do as a director of content, and it's what I love to do. And I'm so grateful that I had that pivotal moment 20 years ago when I switched from journalism into marketing.
So obviously, as director of content in the roles that you've had recently, you've been managing content teams. What would your ideal team look like as working as a director of content? So, what kind of role specifically, how do you like to divide things up?
I think, the ideal is to have a mix, because I like to have the flexibility. So I still use freelancers, and I have some freelancers that I still know from my magazine days, which are they're wonderful people to work with. And because they learn to write stories from in a different era. So my ideal is to have a couple of freelancers so that you have the flexibility to, when volumes increase, you have some flexibility, and then also when volumes decrease, that you don't have people sitting and waiting for work, which actually never happens. It's never happened in any place I worked, so not really an issue. But in-house, I'd love to have, the ideal would be to have one seasoned writer who can do long format, somebody else who is perhaps a little bit younger and a digital native who can write for different social channels or can write like short, snappy things. That also reflects sort of the zeitgeist of how people communicate now, because that changes so quickly. So I would say like 2 or 3 writers internally is wonderful. And then the freelancers, if you can have like a proofreader or a copy editor, somebody who's a dedicated writer who can do medium length things like blogs or, edit down interviews that you want to just present as Q&As. I love doing Q&As. It's one of my favorite format. So if you could have that sort of a team, so, 3 to 5 kind of people, that to me would be ideal. But then I think it's also really important to make sure that your content people, at least the people who are in-house, are speaking to metrics people and really tracking and understanding how things perform, because this is the thing that I love about digital. And when I made that switch from print into digital, that was one of the things I most enjoyed, is that the ability to know very quickly how content is performing. To get, to have somebody set up a dashboard in advance. I'm not a master of dashboards, but I certainly, when I have a dash and I'm lucky enough to have like a performance marketer, then I am looking at that dashboard multiple times a day. First thing in the morning, also looking at it when an e-blast goes out or when something's been put into, something goes in flight, then you really want to be able to do that. I love split testing things. I wish we could do more of it. I think it's a little tougher to do when you're in financial services because of the regulatory environment. It's just a little harder to push things through if you're trying to do a whole bunch of versions. But if I think back to that, I mentioned I spent a couple of years at a utility, Hydro One, which is the electricity provider and distributor for the province of Ontario. We did a lot of split testing just on subject lines, email subject lines. And I maintain to this day, and I tell writers this, I asked them, what is the most important piece of writing in this email or e-newsletter that you're crafting? And sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. But I always say it's the subject line. And so I kind of hammer this into people, and this is my process, is to always have versions. And I learned this from my Deloitte days. When you have somebody like a partner, a leader, an executive, who's going to hopefully spend 5 minutes reviewing a piece of content that you need them to see and bless and approve before you can put it out into the world, it's really helpful to give them options. People like options, right? Whether you're choosing like a popsicle or an ice cream flavor or whatever. It's nice to have choice. And so I would always do versions of headlines, versions of subject lines, and get people to show me what their preference is. Because then that if I have 3 headlines and like 4 different subject lines, then we have choices. Then they're all approved. And then it's much easier to do a split test or test something in market because you've already got all those multiple versions approved. Are you going to write to a leader and ask them to approve 5 words of copy because you thought of a better headline later? No, that's not a good use of their time. And it's definitely not a way to, build your brand internally by being like Mr. or Mrs. Last Minute. So what you want to do is get it all out, spit it all out, get it on paper, get it approved, run it up the channels of approval. And then you have that flexibility.
Talking about metrics and split testing on emails and subject lines, what other really important metrics and numbers do you love to be looking at if you have like a dashboard? And, you said you were looking multiple times a day. What were the other key things that you were keeping an eye on and measuring the most?
I think click-throughs is an easy one, and time spent. So time spent on an article. And if you're able to bookmark and see if there's article completion, then definitely that. There was a period for a couple of years, I was responsible for the webcast program at Deloitte because all the webcasts were on the website. And that was my favorite metric to look at, is like how many people stayed on till the end or till, 3 minutes before the end, because that's really important.
Yeah, massively. Could you tell me about the most memorable marketing campaign that you've run? So, just why it was so memorable and what we were just saying, what were you measuring, what was so important to you and what you learned from it?
I worked at RBC Wealth. I worked on it was a really memorable campaign, and it was really interesting to work on because I got to work with a really great proprietary research firm in the UK. So it was a proprietary research that was done. It was based on surveys of respondents, people who were wealthy individuals, so high net worth people. I think they had to be, I can't remember what there's net worth, disposable income of 2.5 million or something like that. And they provided answers to questions, and then we used that to report on attitudes, trends, feelings towards their wealth, and how they are intending or planning to transfer that wealth to their next generation. So it was really interesting because it's so sensitive, right? It's a sensitive topic, talking about wealth transfer, for many reasons. First of all, because, the respondent is being asked to consider and think about their own demise. And how do I want things to play out when I'm no longer here? So that's kind of sensitive. And then, of course, you have money, which is a sensitive topic for everybody and a stressor for many. And then family. So all of these things bound up together. It was so interesting to work on this thing. And then, so it was a global piece of research. And then, so we commissioned this report. I ended up rewriting quite a bit of it because the writer was based in the UK. The idioms and the expressions that they used were very different. And so I ended up rewriting it to make it more global and a little bit, less British and kind of middle American or middle North American, if you could say, because for a global report, you want it to have a voice that really is accessible to everybody. So we did that, but we still provided the data globally. Like, so, this is on average how many people have a will or have started a conversation with their children about how to transfer their assets. And then we were also able to break it out regionally. So the main regions I mentioned, Canada, US, and UK. And so that was really interesting to see sort of differences between attitudes, between, openness to having those conversations, between how people plan ahead or how people talk about these things, because it's a lot of sensitivity. So that report generated a ton of content. And it was, in my mind, it was a great example of the best practice for generating thought leadership content, because it was proprietary research, global in nature, but then it had, we had the ability to version it out for Canada, US, UK. And then we took those things and also issued press releases highlighting the different facts or findings for the different audiences. So we really got a lot of juice out of that lemon. And then afterwards, we took the same data and we had the research firm sliced and diced it differently. So there were 4 breakouts from that. And then from each one of those, there were social posts, there were videos, or in some cases, we didn't produce the video, but I gave it to the colleague that was running with it in the US. And I said, okay, here's the material. Do you want to record videos or you want to do a podcast for your own channels? Go. And so that gives people the flexibility to do versioning at the country level, and they're able to tell the story in a different way, but it's still in a way that resonates with the audience.
I absolutely love that example. What a fantastic campaign. And as you said, you were able to squeeze so much juice out of that lemon, so to speak. I love that phrase. But, for me, obviously, because of what we do at Content Connect, but, maximizing content, finding ways to get more from it, repurposing it, squeezing the value is a huge thing, which actually leads me on perfectly to the next question, which maybe you've kind of just answered a little bit with the example you gave, but what is your favorite type of content to repurpose? And by type, I suppose I mean, is it, white papers, reports, things like that? Or is it podcasts? Is it videos? Is it cornerstone articles? A favorite type of content that you go to that you just think, right, we'll create that, or we'll put lots of weight to that because we can squeeze so much value from it?
I would say probably a long format report, like a research report or a white paper. That, because there's so much in there, you can probably take it and atomize it out for half a year. Easily. So, and also because, like, despite the fact that I work in content marketing and I love content, we put out quarterly reports about the economic outlook. I don't really believe that a lot of people read the full length content. And so to me, it's a shame to have a 30-pager or whatever length it is, a long multiple page PDF document that everybody's worked so hard on, that every word is like, has been reviewed and poured over in some cases. And to not have people access that. Like, I think the investment team at Picton Mahoney, these are such smart guys. I've had the opportunity to interview all of them, all of the heads of each of the groups. And I always walk away from those interviews with this feeling like, wow, I really want to get more of what they said out into the marketplace, because they inspire confidence. And I'm sure that they would inspire confidence. They inspire confidence in me, and I'm sure they would do so for others, for advisors or the end investor. So I think it's a shame to leave so much stuff on the cutting room floor. If you've already gone to the work of producing a big report, you want to make sure that those little nuggets go out to whatever channels are appropriate in smaller bite-sized chunks, right? Snackable content. That's what people like. And, the truth is, it's not that new. Like in social media, people always talk about how, that audiences are interested in stackable content. You have to take your longer pieces and atomize them out and make them shorter, more digestible. But if you look at the example of an old school magazine with pull quotes and sidebars and infographics, those are also ways to get people into the content. Very often people don't read a 5,000 word article from beginning to end. Their entry point might be a juicy pull quote. And so that's why you do the same things in print. But now the channels of communication are different now. But you still have the ability to do that and pull out really the interesting, colorful quotes and tidbits.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's so important, and it's such a shame and a missed opportunity if people don't do that. And I agree with you. The starting point of a really good report where there's been interviews with people and lots and lots of original insights and thought, etc., has gone into a big piece, then not only is all the content that actually made it into the final piece going to be great for repurposing out into lots of content, but there'll be aspects that actually came out of, say, an interview that didn't make it to the final piece, but still should be repurposed. So there's so much, isn't there? So, that's absolutely, music to my ears to hear that.
There was one other thing I wanted to add, and this was because you're asking what's my favorite piece of content to repurpose. I also really love, this is going to sound so geeky, I love panel discussions for social. I love doing that. And I think it's not done enough. It's not done effectively. And it might be because sometimes the compliance and approval process is a little heavy. But people so often say the most interesting things when they're in a panel discussion in a room with their peers, and they're up there on the stage and they say something. And I love going to events. I don't do it so much anymore, but I used to do it all the time, is going to events and I hear something, and instead of just writing it down for myself, I would tweet it out, because I was like, that's such a great insight. More people should hear this. And I think so, as content marketers, I think that's another somewhat untapped area, is when people go out to events and say things that are unscripted, but authentic and genuine and interesting.
Yeah. Especially in the industry, in investment, asset management, wealth management, finance industry, when trust, the transparency, authenticity is huge, isn't it? So anything that is slightly less scripted and a bit more unpolished and all of that is going to be fantastic content that people can resonate with. So I love that. Are there any tools, like any specific content creation, content management tools that you've used that you've kind of fallen in love with that really help streamline processes or ways of working?
I have experience with some content management tools, but not a whole lot. I am still sort of like old school, and I guess because I learned to do everything in an analog world and just kind of came into digital after learning the core skills of project management. So I still do things very old school on paper, which is hilarious in this day and age. But Asana I found is quite a good tool. So I've worked with Asana for over a year. There was another one that escapes me right now. The name of it escapes me. But I do think those tools are great because you can, especially for teams that are remote or teams where you have people working in different geographies, different time zones. It's so great to have a tool where you go through you go through your queue, you review what has to be done, you move it on to the next status or stage in the content marketing production. And so, I can't say there's any one tool that's better than the others, but I think in general, something that lets you put a timestamp on things, make sure it gets people's attention, so that you don't have to write an urgent subject line, urgent email all the time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The tool that we use for project management, content management is called ClickUp, which is very similar to Asana. And yeah, it's hard to imagine as a busy agency creating all this different content for different clients and stuff. I couldn't imagine life without it. And it's always improving as well in it. And they add AI features and things like that too, which actually is a very good lead on to the next question, which is, are there any ways that you've been leveraging AI at all? Or, what are your feelings and what you might or might not use AI for?
Yeah, of course. Everybody's talking about AI and have been for at least a year, at least in our circles, I would say. We've experimented with AI, and I think any company that considers itself forward thinking and progressive and innovative should or must be doing some experimentation with it to at the very least. I've done some, but it has been minimal because I think the thing to consider is the regulatory environment, because everything has to be reviewed by somebody who's going to look at the text or the video, audio content from a compliance point of view. So that makes it a little trickier because in some organizations, the compliance team can actually have a view on using AI and will actually tell people not to use AI tools because of the fact that you're inputting your material, at least your raw material, into a tool that you're feeding the engine, right? And so we did a couple of things. We did spokesperson quotes for press releases, not necessarily that I was looking to do that, but some of the wealth management leaders, because they're an innovative place and they're looking for efficiencies. So we did that. We also did, we used some chat GPT prompts or content for brochureware. So there was a new emerging service line where we used AI writing as a sort of very rough first draft. And the other place that we used it was in versioning social posts. So because with a social media advocates program that we used, we had multiple advocates developing posts or posting pre-approved posts. And sometimes it was just one post. And so you can use AI to create different versions of posts so that it doesn't feel like 12 people in the organization are posting exactly the same thing. That's kind of a tough nut to crack because they're still sort of like, you don't have that air of authenticity. But in general, what I found with AI writing is it's very fluffy and it's not bad as a first draft, but you have to cut it down a lot. And when I cut out all the fluff, all the extraneous words, all the repetitive words and phrases, I find, I cut 50% at least out of it. And so I think I think of AI as the first draft, but not the best draft by far. I think you still need a human reader, a human editorial type to evaluate it and really think about what is it that you're trying to communicate, and is this the most effective way? Because if you're looking to fill up a lot of words, then an AI chatbot is great, but who needs filler?
Exactly. It's the opposite, isn't it? Brevity is key. Yeah.
Yes. And content is getting shorter, like content formats are getting shorter.
I mean, we had a meeting earlier today. We're trying to, figure AI out as well, and are very mindful, as you said, about the regulatory aspects as well as trademark, copyright infringement, all kind of things like that. But we have a fairly hard and fast rule that we don't use it to write content, but we can use it to help with idea generation and some brainstorming in the start of the phase. And it can be good for doing a review as well at the end when you've done something, and you can ask it to, look at, well, obviously basic stuff like spelling and grammar, but we've had spell check for a long time for things like that. But more than that, like reviewing tone and things like that. But the bit of actually writing content, like you said, unless it's what we commodity content where it's not sharing thoughts or ideas or expressing, emotion, or requires nuance and things like that, and it is just like a summary of that in bullet points or something like that. But it's, I guess, like, it's changing all the time, and you have to keep an eye on it, don't you? But it's a long way off.
You have to keep an eye on it because that's like, it's the hottest, newest thing to hit our industry in a long time. And and the other interesting thing is that it's really turned everything on its head, right? Because, like, if I go back to like the start of my career, I was the managing editor of the Deloitte.ca website for 7 years. When I started, I was the editor of a website. It's a bilingual website, so that's a little trickier, French and English. But it was a website. It was one entity. And then a few years later, social media started cropping up. Like, it was the same. I started working in that industry the same year that Facebook was created. So in a few years, then suddenly we had a mandate to get into some of the social media channels. So by the time I finished that in that role, we had created a YouTube channel, a Flickr channel. Back then it was Flickr, now arguably Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. And so we went from creating content for a website to suddenly having to do a lot of repurposing and a lot of versioning and different lengths, slightly different tone of voice, different style of writing, 140 characters and the various lengths that you would have. So you had to, there was so much more content you had to generate for that. And now I feel like what AI is doing is it's turning everything on its head. Now you don't have to worry so much about getting all those different versions of words, different, outputs or formats of content, because you can get it more easily through AI. But I think it raises the bar for the person who's going to evaluate it and make sure that it, still captures the tone of voice, captures the brand, doesn't open the firm up to any risk. All these kinds of things, I think, have to meet a higher standard for that.
Yeah, you have to have your bits about you a bit more on that copy edit, because it wasn't a fully briefed human that did the first draft. And even though you can give lots of rules to AI and grounds and tone and give it things it can and can't say and stuff like that, it makes mistakes that humans do too, of course, but it's not foolproof, is it? And it will mess up, and it does mess up, so you can't trust it. The copy edit is even more important. So it's interesting. It's interesting, and it's changing all the time. So it's just good to keep an eye out. And I guess talking about things changing all the time, so if you were to look into your crystal ball and think about what you think the future of B2B content marketing might look like in, say, 5 to 10 years from now, is there any major change or major innovation or anything that you foresee on that horizon in this B2B content marketing world?
This is just completely random thought. I don't know if it happens very often, but sometimes you call a company, like, say, your wireless provider, and it's so hard to get a human nowadays to take your call or to give you service. So what if that feeling kind of coalesces into this new trend where people actually want to talk to somebody, where the in a B2B environment, you actually want to have a meeting with somebody. You want to go face to face and have lunch or go to a baseball game instead of doing it all digitally, because I think that'd be really interesting development. I'm not going to put any money on it that's how things are going to go. But I mean, that could happen. I think the danger is that when so many things become automated, how do you feel the authenticity of some communication that you're receiving from a prospective partner? How do you connect with it as a human? I like to connect with humans.
Yeah, I recently interviewed Ian Anderson Gray on the Content 10X podcast, and he was talking about how he just thinks people will lean more into some of the more like live aspects of content, like live webinars, maybe you want Facebook lives, LinkedIn lives, but that kind of human contact and it's not generated by a robot because it's actually live in front of you. And also, more live events and more community building type aspects and humans talking to each other, because there is just so much automated and AI generated and digital content out there that people will, similar to you said, people will crave more human connection through content, as well as just in day-to-day as well, like customer support, things like that. So
yeah, it's not that much of a stretch when you think about it, because you're talking about people's finances. Those are things you don't really want to trust to a robot. I mean, if somebody designs like an index fund or an exchange traded fund that is, just a basket of investments, and you feel like that person, you like that person, or you've read about them, and so you have some degree of confidence in their ability to put that together as a basket of investments, perhaps. But there are other things that you just might want to talk to a human. And sometimes there are questions you don't want to put in writing. You don't want to put it into an email or a text. And so I think there's still, particularly if we're talking about wealth management and serving high net worth investors, then there probably still is quite a lot that you want to have in a face-to-face dialogue.
Yeah, I agree.
Or over the phone.
And I think people would be willing to wait longer for a human than speed from bots in certain circumstances. I know I certainly would.
I had to write some chatbot copy at one point, but I'd be really interested in the research, like how many people actually use chatbots.
They were really popular, weren't they? I feel like there was a big peak of all sorts of companies installing chatbots onto the sites and things like that about 4 or 5 years ago. And I feel like it kind of peaked and then they all started disappearing off sites and things like that. So
what's the mass market uptake? Because do you remember there was a time when everybody developed an app, right? So everybody would talk about, oh, there's an app for that. There's an app for that. And then you go and you download the app. But how many app downloads were there where people never used the app? Like there was an excitement about it. There was a novelty about it. So you download the thing. But if you don't use it, it doesn't matter. In the same way that if you go see your financial advisor, you take home a 30-page report and you never read it because it doesn't have an executive summary or it doesn't have anything catchy that pulls you in, then that's really of limited value. What's the point?
Exactly. Yeah. If you create content and no one consumes it, did you even create it in the first place?
Exactly.
That's a new saying. So 2 final questions I've got for you. So, actually, final question and then for you to ask a question. So for this season 3 B2B Content Strategist, we're having fun with this different part of the podcast where we ask a previous guest to ask the next guest a question. So we'll be asking you your question in a minute, but we'll get your answer first. So if you were in a room full of peers, so like yourself, like content directors, and you could ask a question and get some good advice from the room, what would it be? So Neville Vyas from Impacts Asset Management, Head of Marketing for Europe and APAC at Impacts Asset Management. His question to you is...
My question would be about prioritization. Most marketing leaders are faced with a good suite of products to promote. I have the pleasure of that challenge right now. So I've got a long list of countries, a long list of potential products that they might be interested in, and a limited budget in terms of money and in terms of resource. How do you begin to prioritize where you start, what you do in the beginning, middle, and end of the marketing journey? Prioritization. How do you begin to prioritize?
I think the way that I would think about it is, how do you prioritize it? Well, pilot it. Start with doing it in one region or geography and make it easy to replicate so that you can wash, rinse, and repeat, but also stagger it out regionally, right? So say, you choose one country. Let's say it starts with the letter A. So that's the first country where you pilot it. And I'm thinking thought leadership, but I always go to thought leadership because that's kind of my sweet spot and my comfort zone, if you will. And you develop a piece of thought leadership, and then you juice it. So you produce the report, you produce executive summary, you produce social posts, you might do a webinar, then you might take the results of those webinar and do individual follow-ups with people who asked a question or participated or listened to the whole webinar. So you get the maximum mileage out of that one piece. And then you take the learnings from how that campaign rollout went. And then in country B, you do it again, but you do it 3 to 6 months later after you've had, so it's kind of like you're using each country as a test market, and you do that over a period of time. So I think then you'd get a lot of good learnings from different places. You might have regional differences in terms of how people consume content, or what they, do they listen, do they read, do they watch videos? But I think if you can find some way to replicate it and then improve upon it every single time that you do it, then I think that's really it. In terms of his question about beginning, middle, and end, in my work, I focus more on the top of the funnel and the middle of the funnel. At least in the places that I've been, the end of the marketing journey is where we hand it off to the financial advisor, right? Or in other B2B organizations, it might be the salesperson. So I think if you start at the beginning or the top of the funnel, and you do something that is opening up the conversation, and I talked about the wealth transfer report, how do you open that very tricky conversation about talking about what happens with your wealth when you're gone? And if you can find a way to open that conversation and create something that deals with that subject matter in a respectful way, then you've got something that you can take through to the middle of the funnel. And then you wash, rinse, repeat.
I love that. Yeah. Wash, rinse, repeat. Yeah. Love it. Fantastic. Okay. Well, that was a really great answer. So final question for you is to turn the tables. So what question would you ask back to a fellow content director in a B2B or similar?
A few years ago, I worked for Aviso Wealth, which had all of the funds that Aviso produced were ESG investments. And that was part of the culture of the company, and where the fund management arm developed, as originally it was ethical investing. So now it's called NEI investments. So that was during COVID, and during that time, ESG investing and social issues were really front of mind. They were very top of mind in the news media. People talked about it a lot, talked about epidemic of loneliness. We talked about fair wages for workers, because there were all these hero bonuses for the people who dared to go out and do their jobs while everybody else was sitting at home because we're all in lockdown. And now I feel like we turned the corner and ESG is no longer top of mind. So the question is, how, when you're thinking about content and you're marketing to people, how much or how little do you want to follow the general public discourse of what are the hot topics and trends right now, right? Because I think it's an interesting question. How much do you want to be newsy and on trend versus how much do you want to be just consistently giving the same type of advice and counsel?
I think that's a fantastic question. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's been a really great conversation. Really enjoyed it. So many good answers that you provided. And I know everybody listening is going to have taken tremendous value from this. So Thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Amy. It's been really fun.